Good evening and welcome to our Take Action event, Local Solutions in Response to Global Problems. I'm Elizabeth Farnsworth. I'm a special correspondent for the PBS NewsHour. Thank you. I'm sure that's for the wonderful NewsHour, and I applaud it too. And trustee of the WorldAffairs Council, and I will be moderating during this hour, which is really two sessions in one. WorldAffairs 2010 is focused on innovation in response to crises, from global economic crisis to climate change, international security, and development. While government programs are necessary to address many of these issues, they are not formulated nor can they be successful in a vacuum. Non-governmental and private sector initiatives, as well as individual action, will be crucial in addressing the key issues ahead. We start the evening with two speakers who will each talk about his own approach to solving big problems. First, we'll hear from John Wood, founder and executive chairman of Room to Read. Mr. Wood will discuss how, through a simple idea, he's empowering children across the developing world to break out of the cycle of poverty. Then we'll turn to Craig Newmark, founder of Craigslist. I'll be talking to him about what he's learned at Craigslist about bringing people together to solve mutual problems and how he's extending that experience into other areas at home and abroad. As usual, we'll be taking questions from you. Please pass your question cards to staff. I'll ask as many as time permits. And I welcome all who join us on the web and encourage you to submit questions via our online chat forum. You can also join the conversation via Twitter by using the hashtag WorldAffairs. Now, join me in welcoming our first speaker, John Wood, who left Microsoft at age 35 and founded Room to Read. In its 10 years of existence, Room to Read has built 1,000 schools and more than 9,000 libraries in Nepal, Vietnam, Cambodia, India, South Africa, Zambia, and other places. In April, the 10,000th library will open, 5 a day. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I got you those flowers. Yeah. I love PBS, so I had to get you flowers. This is my deliberately, hopefully provocative question. What would the world look like if every person could read? How different would the world look? And I guess my other question is, why the heck are we not pursuing this goal, given how many children in the poorest parts of the world cannot read? This is me. This is my book, Leaving Microsoft to Change the World. The nice thing about having this title for my book is I actually got this title before Bill Gates could get this title for his book. And it's not often in life that you're ahead of Bill, but hopefully one day he will license my intellectual property for several $1 million. My own story starts in Nepal in 1998. I went there as a burned-out Microsoft executive. I was looking for an escape from email, an escape from management team meetings, an escape from constant pressures of being at work. And on this 18-day trek, I was asked by a headmaster to come see his school. Now, how many of you have seen a school like this somewhere in the developing world? It's both simultaneously hopeful but also depressing because these kids want to learn, but they have so few resources, and they're being asked to learn in these environments that are just so detrimental to learning. They're so resource deprived. This headmaster that I met invited me to come see the school, and then he invited me to come see the school's library. And I naively thought the library would look like this, right? It's a happy place with kids with smiles on their faces reading books. How many of you were library nerds as kids, like I was? Oh, come on, more than that. You're at a World Affairs Council annual meeting. Every hand should go in the air. Well, I'm proud to say I was a library nerd. What struck me about this library, however, was that it didn't look like this. It looked like this. Many of you have probably seen this situation before. Empty libraries, devoid of books. The headmaster explained they had 500 students at this school. They had a lock on the cabinet because they had so few books, they had to keep them under lock and key. He showed me the books. These books were not appropriate for children. They were things that backpackers had left behind. I'm no literary snob. I think every child should read Danielle Steele at some point in their pedagogical development. But these books were just not the least bit appropriate for children. And the headmaster spoke a sentence that would, for me, forever change my adult life. Chapter 1 of my book is titled, "Perhaps, Sir, you will someday come back with books." His very simple, very humble request. And I got excited about the idea of helping this headmaster. 500 students. This would be a great excuse to come back to Nepal. A great way to help kids. Most importantly, I'd made some money at a young age. And my parents always taught me that if you have a lot of money, it doesn't make you a good person. What makes you a good person is what you actually do with that money. Do you share it with others who are less fortunate? So I trekked for day after day after day after day and just kept thinking about that headmaster and the students, and I promised that I would bring them books. And one night, in the middle of the night, at 2 o'clock in the morning, I had this vision in the middle of the night. I may have had the vision because I was drinking the local Rockshi at 16,000 feet altitude, but we must take our visions where we can get them. And my vision, was of Carnegie. Carnegie gave America this fantastic gift, 3,000 libraries. And in a single stroke, Carnegie removed the barriers to learning. Anybody who wanted to go and read could do so. It didn't matter what gender you were, how rich you were, where you lived. Carnegie did this amazing thing. So I thought, I don't have Carnegie's resources, but I've got a lot of stamina and a strong work ethic, and I want to be the Andrew Carnegie of Bahundanda, Nepal. That's my goal. But I want to do Carnegie one better. I want to be Carnegie with a yak. Right? I mean, I wanted to have a yak full of, a full frontal yak attack. I wanted to have so many books that I would need to have a whole flotilla of yaks. And this is my original big thinking, was it's not enough to just fill my own backpack full of books. I'll need to rent some yaks and go back. And I went back to Nepal a year later with my 73-year-old father as my unpaid volunteer, which was an interesting story in and of itself, traveling with I don't know if any of you have traveled solo with an adult parent while an adult yourself in the developing world, but if you have not done it, you should, because if I had to do it, you should have to do it also. No, I'm kidding. It was a great time, and what was most striking to us was the reaction we got from the parents and the teachers and the kids. We had done something so little. We had done a book drive. We had collected 3,000 children's books. We delivered them, and it was like the biggest thing the village had ever seen. The kids had strung marigold garlands. They were lined up to greet us, and we'd done something that was so small. And we went to 10 different schools over the course of 3 days and just dropped books off. And every place we went, the reaction was like this. This is like the kids were stage diving onto the books. It was like a mosh pit. It was like literacy palooza. These kids were just, everybody under the age of 30 laughed at that joke, yeah. So I sat there with my father that night having a beer. And this is not a photo of my dad and I having a beer at night. And I said, this is so inconsequential compared to what's needed. We helped 10 schools. We helped a couple thousand kids. There's tens of millions of kids who lack basic literacy. And it was at that moment that I began to basically decide to extricate myself from Microsoft. At the time, I was running business development for the Greater China region out of Beijing. I was number 2 in the China region. And the world thought I was crazy because I walked away from that in 1999, and I said, I'm going to devote the rest of my life to more moments like this. Hopefully dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of moments like this. And so what came of that was this desire on my part to devote the most productive years of my adult life to the idea of universal education. If we can bring the slides back up, that would be helpful, because I want to show you some graphs here. Okay, so why? Why devote your life to this? Well, it's pretty clear, if you look at the data, that the more education a nation has, the better off it is and the more productive it is economically. Education is the only proven long-term ticket out of poverty. And if you look at the countries in the upper right-hand part, it's the United States, Canada, Switzerland, etc. Lower left-hand part, you see Afghanistan, you see Pakistan, you see Somalia, you see some of the poorest parts of the world. That headmaster in Nepal had told me, he said, we are too poor to afford education, but until we have education, we'll always be poor. And I'm no developmental economist, but I think that sums up the plight of the bottom billion of the world so well. Too poor to afford it, but until we have it, we're always going to be poor. Of course, with education, there's also a ripple effect. It is the one issue that affects every other issue. It doesn't just affect income and escape from poverty. It escapes family health. It impacts family health. You can see a direct connection between the amount of education a woman has and how healthy her family is, and whether she is at risk of dying or the child's at risk of dying during childbirth. You can look at education versus life expectancy and again see a direct link. So I decided to devote the rest of my life to this because I thought this is the greatest way to change the world, and yet not enough is being done. The goal that I had was pretty simple. It was to basically kind of try to Carnegieize as many parts of the world as possible. Bring books, bring libraries, bring trained librarians, bring education to as many places as possible. This is the library I grew up with in the small town of Athens, Pennsylvania. This was a huge influence on me. So for me, it was payback time, right? A nice woman in 1893 memorialized her dead son with a library that I went to every single week. And so I thought, well, if we're going to do that for the rest of the world, we're going to have to think big. we're going to have to think really big. If you look at the world today, I think this is the most overlooked issue, by the way, in the world today. The overlooked issues are fairly simple. I'm going to give you 3 numbers. Number 1, if you look at this part of the world, 300 million children woke up this morning and did not go to school. 300 million. 750 million people in the world today are illiterate. It's 1 of 8 human beings cannot read or write. And this is overlooked because in most of the rich countries, yeah, we have issues, we have problems, no doubt, but we have literacy rates in the high 90s. In this part of the world, you literally have 750 million people who cannot read or write. 2/3 of those groups are girls and women. And this is a problem that pays itself forward in perpetuity, because if the women do not get educated, the next generation does not get educated. And I am proud to say that ich bin ein Feminist. I believe every girl everywhere in the world should go to school. That is non-negotiable, right? So, now the issue for me was that when Carnegie started his library building project in America, back in the Little House in the Prairie era, there were 63 million people in America. I had a target group 12 times that size, 750 million. And I was one guy, literally living in the marina. I moved to San Francisco. I used my second bedroom as a new world headquarters of Room to Read. It was myself, a Nokia cell phone I bought at Radio Shack, and a Dell laptop. That was what we were 10 years ago this month, just in startup mode. And I wanted to basically collect as many great people as possible and say, let's do for the developing world what Carnegie did for America. That should be something we can all embrace, because education is a hand up, not a handout. But I wanted to change the model in a very California, Silicon Valley kind of way, right? Let's invent something new. And the idea that I had was that in the old way of doing things in philanthropy, and no offense to anybody in the room who's old, rich, and white, we should all be doing our part to help the world. But the old way of doing philanthropy was you got really rich, and then at some point around the age of 70 or 75, you start having these intonations of mortality, and people start giving their money away. My goal is to basically build a global network that would be literally the Andrew Carnegie of the 21st century, the Andrew Carnegie of the developing world. And it was going to take us basically having 4 main groups of people I had to go recruit. I was used to building teams, high-performance teams at Microsoft. What I now needed to do is get outside my comfort zone and go build high-performance teams in the space of education, in which, by the way, I had not one iota of experience. I was making this up as I went along. To me, there were 4 key groups I wanted to recruit. Number 1, strong local teams. Room to Read's goal has always been to hire strong Vietnamese in Vietnam, strong Nepalis in Nepal, strong South Africans in South Africa. I do not believe in the model of sending highly paid American expatriates overseas to boss the local people around. In all of human history, that hasn't really had a good track record. I told the country directors from the very beginning, I work for you. My job is to get you resources so you can go to more places and help more kids every single day, reach more and more kids. The local teams we hired then did something that was absolutely critical. They went out and recruited the parents and recruited the community members through what we called the challenge grant model. The idea was very simple. You can't help people if they don't want to help themselves. One of the criticisms I have of foreign aid is that too often we go in and just drop a bunch of stuff off for a community that they didn't ask for, that they haven't worked for, and then they don't value it. It's not sustainable. So the idea we had starting in Nepal, my country director Dinesh came up with, was called the challenge grant model. And the idea was very simple. We would tell the parents, if you want this, you will work for it. We worked with the government to say, if we build a school, will you provide the teachers? Will you sign on a dotted line to do that? And the governments did. The ministries were really great to work together. And everywhere in the world that we worked, we started to engage the parents. And I watched these parents carry bags of cement, 100-pound bags of cement, up the hillside at sunrise. You watch parents out digging a foundation. You watch parents mixing the cement. And this is really the spirit that comes in the developing world. When you offer people a chance, they take it. Too often we act as though the developing world has a weak work ethic. They don't. These parents are lining up. We have thousands of villages right now asking us right now whether they can work with us to provide schools and libraries. The third group of people we needed to recruit were volunteers around the world. What does the wealthy part of the world that's represented here have in abundance? Capital. We had, within a couple of years, hundreds, and we now have thousands of villages lining up asking us to build them a school, or build the school with them, to set up a library, to sponsor scholarships for their daughters so that the girls have equal access to education.
So we basically mobilized volunteers, and we said our version of volunteering is not going to overseas and hammering in nails. The parents are willing to do that. Our version of volunteering is raising money to fund projects. Go visit the projects if you like, but let's mobilize as much capital as possible. So everywhere that we worked, and I just circled the world for years and years and years, and I'm still doing it, but from Amsterdam to Austin to Boston to Calgary to Chicago to Dubai to Hong Kong to Sydney to Tokyo, we now have over 4,000 people who carry a room-to-read business card. Payroll, 0. These are highly motivated people who basically do fundraising for us. And what I say to them is, you do not have to ask your friends for money. You have to ask your friends to get together, at which point I will ask them for money. And we ask people to fund a school, to fund a library, to fund a 10-year girls scholarship. I am proud to say that this model has now generated over $90 million of funding. From a standing start, we've raised $90 million in the last decade. And that's a lot of money, but it's especially a lot of money when you take it in the developing world, where you can literally sponsor a girl's education for $250 a year. So those results Elizabeth talked about are basically because we've been able to go out and mobilize capital in the wealthiest parts of the world. Now, the final piece of the puzzle was really complicated. It was very simple, though. There is literally no Dr. Seuss or Dr. Seuss in the developing world. What would your life be like if you hadn't grown up with books written in your native language? It'd be pretty dismal, right? Well, throughout the developing world, they don't have enough books in the local language because parents in Laos or Cambodia or Vietnam or Nepal or Sri Lanka are too poor to afford books. So there's no market. No market equals no books. No books equal no literacy, et cetera, et cetera. What we did is basically went out and found local authors and local artists and trained them to write and illustrate children's books. So in addition to being the Carnegie of the developing world, we then decided, well, let's be the Dr. or Dr. Seuss of the developing world. Local authors and local artists doing original content, not translations, original content. And this is what the books look like. We've now done over 400 titles. What I'm going to do is show you 30 of these titles in 30 seconds. Visualize these kids reading these books every day. And I want to assure you that every one of our books has a happy ending. We've now produced over 440 of these titles using local authors and local artists. The talent is out there. It just has to be mobilized. For us, our happy ending is what we've been able to accomplish in a decade. We now have over 9,000 girls in our long-term scholarship program. Every one of them guaranteed she will stay in school through the end of secondary school. Last year, 98% of our girls passed the next grade. Last year, 61% of the girls in Vietnam who finished our scholarship program matriculated on their own with no help from us. 61% went to university and is now enrolled in university. These girls want to succeed. We've now put over 7 million books in the hands of kids. So what started with a yak or a couple of yaks with 3,000 books has grown absolutely exponentially. As Elizabeth mentioned, we have now opened 1,129 schools using parental labor. We open now a new school every 34 hours somewhere in the developing world. 5 schools per week opening right now. And then finally, over 9,000 libraries have been opened across 9 countries in Africa and Asia. We are now opening 5 libraries a day, a new library every 4 hours and 40 minutes opening. So between lunch and dinner, new library. Between the time you go to bed and the time you wake up, new library. Between the time you board a flight in New York and the time you land here in SFO, assuming strong headwinds, a new library opens. So what started as a small startup literally got to the point of actually out-Starbucking Starbucks. We actually looked at our growth versus their growth post-IPO, and as you see, their new outlets are in yellow, our libraries are in green. First couple of years, they're kicking our ass. Then we're catching up. Years 5, 6, 7, 8, we're actually out-Starbucking Starbucks. So my message to Howard Schultz is clear. It is, we are taking you down. Unless you fund us. By the end of this year, we'll have 5 million kids accessing our schools and libraries. So this is, I think, something that is a kind of a Silicon Valley, Northern California story. Innovation, strong work ethic, networking around the world to basically reach as many kids as possible. And my closing remark is very, very simple. It is that we intend in this lifetime to lead a movement, and that movement is going to be all about making sure that no child is ever told you were born in the wrong place at the wrong time to the wrong parents. That deserves to be a part of human history in the same way that smallpox and malaria deserve to be a part of history. We will not stop, we will not rest until every single child everywhere in the world has an opportunity to gain the lifelong gift of education. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
You've just come back from a trip. Tell us just briefly a little about the trip, because I think it'll give everybody a sense of how you function and how you're raising money.
Well, we have these amazing fundraising chapters around the world, and so we actually did a 24-day trip to Melbourne, Sydney, Hong Kong, and Tokyo. And our goal is to turn this into a global movement and not just have American funding, but have funding from all the wealthy countries. And when I landed at SFO on Monday, I had a spreadsheet and actually calculated we actually received $4.4 million of new commitments in 21 days. And all that from other wealthy parts of the world where literally this is becoming a movement. In Japan, we have over 1,000 volunteers involved so far. In one night in Hong Kong, we got all the bankers and hedge fund guys in the room. It's bonus season in Hong Kong. We raised $2 million in a night. Because we could tell people, we will show you exactly where your school is, exactly where your library is, and give you a direct connection. And, oh yeah, by the way, you can build a preschool for $20,000. And not everybody can afford that. But literally, people will go around the table and say, okay, I'll do 10% if you do 10%, and we'll get our company matching. And that's really the spirit we're trying to have, is that everybody can just do something that aggregates up.
And aren't you able to do this partly because you're following certain business practices that people learn about? Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our management team actually are corporate refugees. They might have worked in banking or at Chiron, or, you know, I mean, we literally have like hopefully the best of all worlds, where we have great people who did Peace Corps, they did their master's in education at Stanford, or their PhD in education, and they deliver what we hope are highly relevant, high quality, and sustainable education programs. But grafted onto that are the corporate refugees and our board of directors, who are all about scale, growth, etc. But the main thing about the business world that I think is important is, if a business sees opportunity, a business scales, a business grows to see that opportunity. In the charity world, there's all these really small solutions that don't scale. And when I look at that, I say, that's ridiculous. We have got to start thinking bigger about this. It's no longer enough for somebody who's a billionaire to say, oh, my family supports an orphanage in Guatemala. It's like, yeah, that's great. You need to support 100 orphanages in Guatemala. And it's great that Carlos Slim is now the wealthiest guy in the world, according to yesterday's Forbes rankings. But my message to Carlos Slim, and he can be mad at me for saying it, I don't really know the guy, but he needs to do what Buffett and Bill and Melinda have done, and move all his chips onto the philanthropy table. And every one of the world's billionaires should be held to account to say, how much of your fortune are you using to improve the world? Because if you're not using your fortune to improve the world, then I don't think the world should be applauding you just for being rich. And I think Bill and Melinda and Warren deserve our applause for what they have done.
Are you telling people this? I mean, you know some of these people. Are you telling them?
Well, I mean, any billionaire who gives me a meeting, I certainly am willing to harangue. But unfortunately, a lot of them don't want to give me a meeting because they know it's coming.
Right. This raises the question. This is a question about the literacy rate in Uzbekistan, but this could be true.
Oh, God, is this like Jeopardy? What's the literacy rate in Uzbekistan?
We're entertaining, but we're not that entertaining. Is 96%, and yet the people there and elsewhere face some of the worst health and economic conditions in the world. After you've taught everyone to read, this is an audience question, what needs to happen to ensure that their literacy translates to prosperity?
Well, I mean, I think there's the whole theses written on this, right? So whether or not somebody with my limited brain power can answer that, it's tough. I think that literacy and education are one thing, but along with that, you have to have rule of law, you have to have economic opportunity.
But actually, just what you see, you're going to these places, you're in Nepal, just from what you see, what would be, if you decided to move into one other thing, what would it be?
I wouldn't move into anything else, to be honest with you.
Because reading's so important.
Well, Room to Read is what a venture capitalist would call a pure play. We want to do one thing and do it really well. Now, within that, of course, there's multiple silos. There's school construction, there's libraries, there's local language publishing, there's girls' scholarships. But I actually don't believe in the charity conglomerate model. I don't believe in trying to do 30 things at once and doing all of them, some of them well, some of them not so well. I'd rather live or die by the quality of the programs that we do. And I'm not saying it's perfect. I mean, it's what we do is not easy. If it was easy, it would have been done by now. But in terms of, I don't know much about Uzbekistan, but I think one thing I will say is that one of our selection criteria for countries that we work in is we do try to find places where we feel like there's reasonable economic growth, so when a child graduates, they can join, kind of the global conversation that we're all a part of. And so a place like Vietnam, a place like India, a place like Sri Lanka have seen pretty good economic growth, South Africa. And so what we're really trying to do is try to accelerate that by having more kids get more education. And I interrupted you. You were also saying just about what might be done, rule of law. What were some of the other things you'd mentioned there? Oh gosh, I mean, there's so many things you need. But I think when the world comes together, I mean, so if you look at like what Jeff Sachs is doing, right? You probably could take the 4 things they're trying to do in each millennial village, and say if you do those 4 things right, the world's going to be a much better place. And I don't think that just opening a bunch of schools and libraries alone is going to solve the problem. But what I do know is that when I'm on my deathbed, I'm going to say we did everything in our power to reach, and my goal is to reach at least 20 million kids during this lifetime with schools and libraries. Will every one of those kids be a healthy, middle class, No, definitely not. But I think the worst thing in the world that we have today is poverty, not just poverty, it's poverty of opportunity. We have got to move beyond the whole idea that any child can be told, you lost the lottery of life. How do you look a 5-year-old in the eye and say, you don't get to go to school? That just seems ridiculous. We have only 1 minute left, and in this time, I think this has been inspiring for people. And here's a typical question. This is from the web. What can people of average income do to help fundraise? I've heard of beers for books, and that seems like something my friends would enjoy. Oh, Beers for Books is brilliant. It started in Japan, and the idea was this guy, Gary Bremerman, approached a bunch of bar owners and said, if you give 100 yen, e.g. $1, for every drink my friends drink, that will produce 1 local language children's book in a place like Nepal or Sri Lanka. And I was just at a Beers for Books event last week in Tokyo. They had 600 people there. So it's just fun and simple. It's a fun way to fundraise. But, everybody can do something. I mean, if somebody buys a copy of my book, which is on sale here today, by the way, and gives it to a friend, that can help. If somebody says, I'm going to give $250 a year to sponsor a girl's scholarship, then one little girl's life in post-Khmer Rouge Cambodia can be changed. And I think it's appropriate, and thank you to Jane and her team for having this session be about taking action. Because I've got to tell you, I think there's way too much talk in the world. And if everybody just does one thing, then we can go to sleep at night feeling better about the fact that we're going to leave the world a better place than we found it. Thank you, John Wood. Thank you. And now I'm glad to welcome our second guest for the evening, Craig Newmark. Mr. Newmark probably does not need an introduction for lots of us. If you've bought or sold anything, needed a place to rent, or looked for a job recently, chances are you've gone onto Craigslist. Craig Newmark founded his site, I think it was in March, in 1995 as an email distribution list for friends. Craigslist is said to scorn advertising, refuse investment, ignore design, and refuse to innovate. However, with this business model, it is now established in 700 cities and 55 countries and has 20 billion page views per month. Please join me in welcoming Craig Newmark. You've said, Craig, that Craigslist involves getting a lot of people together to work for the common good, and that you'd like to extend that to other areas where people help each other out. What have you learned from Craigslist about people and how they could work together for the common good?
I've just made some basic observations which maybe we all make, but sometimes not consciously enough. For example, somehow, without consciously trying to do it, on Craigslist, working with people, we built a culture of trust. People generally give each other a break. Not so bad. And the deal is that people do want to work together for the most part. There are bad guys out there. There are actually very few of them. And the deal is that part of what I do as a customer service rep is deal with them. I haven't done much for the last 40 minutes, but like 45 minutes ago, I got an email from a guy who was posting deceptively, and I think I'm on the verge of turning him around.
How'd you know?
Well, he admitted that we've blocked him from posting.
Oh.
And this has to do with apartments in New York City, which is a fairly predatory environment if you ever lived in Manhattan. But the deal is that people generally want to give each other a break. People are okay. And as long as you give people the means to deal with the bad guys, kind of neighborhood watch, they'll do a lot of the job for you. So people do want to work together, and on the net it can be pretty simple, pretty easy to do that. So I'm exploring some areas where I can work with other people to do the job. I mean, I do want to save the world, because I need to get out more often. But I'm too lazy to do it, and I really enjoy TV. So I'll try to talk other people into doing it and work with them. I'm on the advisory board now of Wikipedia. The deal there is that I'm starting to work with them a little bit on customer service issues, particularly when it pertains to somebody launching an attack on the biography of someone who's alive. Because you see that happens, and over this past weekend I made my first correction after doing the research for a notable politician. And then I join groups like I'm involved with the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, because through most of a recent 8-year period, they were kind of screwed. And now I'm working with folks to help get them the medical and educational benefits they've earned.
Be more specific. Tell us how you're working and how what you learned at Craigslist applies here.
Okay. The deal is that Craigslist, I've learned that the basic lesson is that online you can get people to work together to apply pressure where it's needed to get things done. The leaders in this particular space, that's, again, the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, you may have seen their public service announcements, one called Alone, where a vet just shows up in the middle of the city, no one's around, but someone from this group, IAVA, comes and greets them, and life may start getting back to normal. Because these guys even recently visited Washington and are pushing forward for lots of basic things, like a lot of stop-loss National Guard didn't get back pay until it was authorized in the last year. The deal is, if you're going to say you're supporting the troops, you should actually do something rather than just saying you're supporting the troops. And that's actually a recent phenomenon when it comes to the White House. I'm also involved with...
And
yes.
How does this work online? The pressure, what's happening exactly?
The deal is they, on the one hand, run campaigns where they say, hey, this thing needs to happen in Congress, like more reliable funding for Veterans Affairs. So they run a campaign and where they just get people to be involved, sometimes just to call their senator or congressman. In other cases, they have something called communityofveterans.org, and that's for vets of Afghanistan or Iraq. The deal is, just like on TV or the movies sometimes, if you've been in a war, well, the only people you're going to talk to about it are the people who've been in that war with you. Tangentially, I'm going to mention that most of the attention these days does go to veterans of the recent wars, but I'm starting to chat with people like who represent veterans of Vietnam and so on, because they're kind of getting neglected, and that's something we got to stand up for also. In all this, it may occur to you that what we're doing on the net, even raising money in microfinance or whatever, we're doing stuff that you could always do. You could always raise money for a good cause around a water cooler. What the internet allows you to do is to scale this up into the millions. As you put something online, you get a lot of people's attention, and then you got something going.
I read that Tom Malone said that you have this word that you've used for yourself, that you're like a community meta-organizer. Or no, Tom Malone called you that, right? Using the internet to allow face-to-face communications on a scale of 10 to millions. Tens of millions.
Yeah. The deal is maybe the essence of grassroots, bottoms-up democracy are community organizers, people who get other people together to get something done. Well, that's the real work. You know, being a community organizer means you do have real responsibilities. And again, I'm too lazy to really do that, but I've gotten okay at connecting people who are doing that. I'm talking about the use of things like social media tools. For example, if you see me on Twitter, you'll see that I'm retweeting a lot people who are doing good stuff, so that I'm pointing not only to the good stuff, but giving the person some public credit, some affirmation. You'll see I blog too, and I'm on Facebook, and you'll see I'm either pushing the efforts of other people doing good things, or I'm amusing myself. And for those of you who see me on Twitter, I am not common squirrel. And that only makes sense if you do see me on Twitter.
But I know that you're modest, and you say that you like TV, and you know you're too lazy to do all this. But this is also represents your philosophy, right, about how best to use the talents you have to help save the world.
Well, I know how to do a few things well, and they involve using some technology. I mean, I am a nerd after all. The whole plastic pocket protector thing, thick black glasses taped together in high school, that was literally true of me. So I know how to use some of this. I'm not a natural networker, but at least I can suggest to people that they talk to each other. I find myself in unexpected ways doing that, like regarding, the White House's outreach to the Islamic world, because there's going to be a conference on entrepreneurship there at the end of next month. And so I said to people, hey, take a look at ArabCrunch.net, which is about technology in the Arab world. It's an outgrowth of TechCrunch, if anyone's paid attention to that one.
And you have certain areas that are very important to you, it seems. Transparency, you've been working with the Obama administration on that. Journalism, you work closely, I think, or have helped fund several online journalistic organizations. And the Middle East, too. Tell us about the work in the Middle East.
The work I've done in the Middle East is pretty half-assed. What I'm doing is unfortunately, I read history now.
At least you admit it.
Well, the deal is that, and I read about this Marshall Plan thing, which was a great expression of American values and helped prevent extremism in Europe, and was pretty good for building markets, frankly. So I figure, again, I'm a bottom-up guy. I'll build my own Marshall Plan. So what I do is I worked with Kiva, which is local, microfinance, and some other groups, and I tied Kiva to CHF International, which has boots on the ground in a lot of places. And they're doing the work now together in the West Bank of Palestine, helping fund small business people with the intent, hopefully, of creating jobs, because we need jobs everywhere. And I figured, I talked to people in the Israeli government, a little bit in the Palestinian, and in the State Department, figuring that there's some trouble that's just way out of my league. And, they said, hey, this is just perfect, because while they're working on negotiating peace, I can do stuff like, at least in this very small way, help build up business. So the deal is that, we all can do these little bitty things. Again, there's microfinance, and there's also DonorsChoose.org, which is microfinance for classroom projects.
Yeah, describe this in detail. This is very interesting for those who don't know about it.
Briefly, because you could look it up, The deal is, if you're a teacher, if you're a teacher, you can put online a classroom project, ask people to contribute to it $20 at a time or $100. It gets funded. The kids do something. They send you thank yous, and it's pictures online. Not bad. And like today, I did a little more along those lines, because frankly, I seem to have adopted a school in South Carolina, partially because a guy who's on the board is this Colbert guy, and who's from South Carolina. And I figured, I think I now have more. I think I'm more honorary doctorate than he is, because I think it's 3-2 right now. Yeah, I got one at a Jesuit school recently, and apparently now I am a Jesuit. which my rabbi might take issue with.
So, what do you say to people here who would like to use social networking and the other tools that you care about to do this sort of work? First of all, why is it working for, in your view, some of the things you're doing? What's important about it, and how could they do it themselves?
Well, the hard part of this is an exercise in promotion, in marketing, if you will. The deal is that a lot of folks do a lot of good things, and sometimes, they're really good at it, but unless people know you're doing it and take part, it's like a tree falling in the forest. And the idea is to start using some of the big social networking tools. I mostly use Facebook and Twitter, although I'm exploring Foursquare as well. And I'm taking a look at Google Buzz. And the idea is to get the word out, to engage with those of your friends or people with like minds, to start getting the word out using those tools. Because you need to create a blip of attention, and then you need to create another blip of attention so that people are finally paying attention to what you're doing. Like the folks at Charity Water, who focus on getting wells or whatever to people in the developing world who don't have clean water, they're using Twitter a fair amount. So the deal is that when I find out about an effort, and if I see that it's something that I understand and has been vetted somewhat, then I'll start retweeting what they do. People are telling me I may be retweeting a little bit too much, although they like my bird sightings, of all things. But the deal is I'll just push it and then push it a little bit more, because there's a lot of people in this country who are doing good things. Now and then I'll actually understand what they're doing. Somehow I'll feel a connection, and then I'll try to do something. And we just need a lot more people to do that.
And you actively care deeply about this way of doing it, as opposed to big institution building.
Well, the top-down stuff, I don't know how well it works. And all I know how to do is the bottom-up, grassroots stuff. The deal is that, remember, my job really is customer service. I don't have a role in management. I'm on the board of Craigslist, but I don't do anything day to day. And so I'm looking at everything from the bottom up, and I see that the only way things seem to happen is to just keep nudging from the bottom and nudging more, and trying to build message too. If I was really smart, I would try to build sound bites, catchy sound bites for the things I believe in, because that gets people's attention. And I'm aware of the irony here. Here I am as a nerd talking about what's ultimately marketing, and that's a crime against nature. Nevertheless, I'll keep pushing. But anything probably anyone in this room needs to do is build a social media strategy. And if we could, forgive me, this is new material, but if we could cue the music from The Godfather, I would say that if you don't have a social media strategy, you're dead to me. You already sleep with the fishes. So the deal is that look at these tools, figure out what makes sense to you, Facebook in particular, because this stuff really matters. It connects us to other people, both for maybe what we believe in, but also in your family, your old friends, and so on. You'll dredge up people from your past you wish you weren't connected with, but everything gets you collateral damage these days.
Don't forget to send your questions up, and all of you on the web, send your questions to us, please. Here's a question about the Internet, the Internet's impact on newspapers, but Craigslist's impact specifically. It's been said that Craigslist has had a big part in putting newspapers in a perilous financial state. How do you respond to that?
For the most part, the magnitude of our effect on newspapers has been exaggerated. It's easy to say, but it's mostly, at this point, an urban legend. The effect that I'd like to have personally on newspapers, is to remind everyone that trust is the new black. The deal is that pretty much everything we do in life is based on trust. In the news industry, a lot of that's based on things like fact-checking and just trying to get it right. The problem is that that's, a lot of news institutions try to do that in good faith now, but fact-checking is expensive and quite a burden, and so that's something to push. I'm beginning to think, and there's opportunities for news organizations for this, but I think the ones that build the best networks of trust will be the news organizations that thrive and do the best, in the world that's coming. So I do feel in this 10-year period, we are looking at a tipping point, not just in journalism, but everything where people work together.
I want to ask you in a minute about the journalistic ventures that you're supporting, but first, why do you say it's an urban legend when the decline in classifieds has so badly hurt the newspapers? Partly because of Craigslist.
Yes. The deal is that, newspapers made use of very expensive classifieds for so long. And the deal is the sweet spot of advertising. Well, that's like cars, employment, and stuff like that. And there are some rather aggressive companies going after those markets. On the other hand, we don't even advertise. It's not like we rely on my charm or anything like that. You write your own joke there. I said there's some material I have to try to find a way to work in, too.
I'll work with you.
Yeah. Ask me about the Wired magazine cover. But the deal is that newspapers have bigger problems, like they use paper. Paper is expensive to buy, to print, to deliver. And there's been some analyses which say that when newspapers go all digital, a lot of costs disappear.
Now, on the question about the ventures you're supporting, tell us about the Sunlight Foundation and what you did at the recent healthcare meeting, or what it did at the recent healthcare meeting. And I think even though this is a global, we're talking about global problems. We all know the problems we're here to discuss, but I think this sort of transparency it has a universal application.
Well, the deal with Sunlight Foundation is that they start by figuring that we should hold our government or governments accountable for what happens.
This is a foundation that has an online presence.
Yeah, it's all online. And the deal is, the strategy is to make everything as transparent as possible, to show you, where the money goes, or, who's being honest with stuff, what are the facts, and all that. So the main thing Sunlight does is it funds a network of other groups which are getting data that the government's putting online, and the new administration is putting a lot of this data online. And then Sunlight funds groups to write some software so that, again, we can see where the money goes in specific cases, like who's getting contracts. Ultimately, maybe you could do something like showing what monies a lobbyist gives and what they get for it. And that would be interesting. Recently, they did something new with the most recent healthcare summit, and as people were saying things like a senator or congressman, they would do things like in real time show how much money the politician was getting from the health industry. And that's kind of quaint. I like the idea of that. And again, we're seeing more of that kind of thing. So this is a group based in Washington, and the idea is that the part of the movement, which right now is spearheaded by some folks in the White House, is get a lot of data online about what's really going on, and then other people can write software which shows, where the money goes. Now, that's a big use of this stuff. I'll just mention that also, day to day, what we need from government are things like picking up the garbage or fixing a pothole. There's other trends like that. In San Francisco and other cities, we got 311. You call up a number or go to a website, you can get one of those things fixed. That's another part of this whole effort, which collectively people call Government 2.0. And it's a pretty big deal, and it is spreading. People are looking into this in, say, the UK. Oddly enough, the so-called conservatives are looking at it. I'll just remind people that the conservatives there are, by American, in American terminology, they're the moderates, the centrists. It's crazy.
I have 3 questions here which get to the sort of broad question I wanted to raise. Tomorrow we'll have a panel that includes Yevgeny Morozov, who will talk about whether this sort of analysis of what's possible on the Internet is techno-utopianism. I'm sure you've heard this term. And these are questions there are 3 questions here that are sort of getting at that issue. What kind of resistance has Craigslist met in other countries? In China, how would you organize? Sometimes, the Facebook and Twitter are banned online in China. Sometimes bottom-up doesn't work, does it?
In large part, I don't know, because, like when Google started coming up with their own specialized version for China, I tried to read something about it. At the same time, more or less, there was an article in the New York Times Sunday magazine, and I realized that we're dealing with a different culture. People have different values and think differently about education and data, and what they want is help just with people modernizing, getting jobs, and so on. So I don't know, and I figure I sure don't want to be some kind of arrogant guy who thinks that my values are more important than the values of people elsewhere. So the deal is we make something available, and maybe all we serve for some years are expatriates overseas, that kind of thing. And that's what works for us. We only go into a new city or a new country when we're welcome there, and we try to respect the wishes and the culture that are there. So I don't know a lot about what's going on there.
And so this question, how do you open the doors to countries that are more conservative politically, socially, for this sort of social networking?
Okay. In general, again, we ask to be welcomed in. But more specifically, I don't have answers. Mm-hmm. When I do get curious about that, I go to some of the sites which focus on that, like Global Voices Online, or to some extent I've been involved in the Arab-U.S. Media Alliance. But meanwhile, they're still figuring out what that involves, and I think they meet in Washington in a couple weeks, and I'll try to find more about what they conclude, and then try to apply it when I go to that other conference in about a month or so. The deal is that no one believes in anything that you call techno-utopianism. The Internet is just about connecting people, getting people connected to each other in the ways that we always could. The difference is that we could scale into the millions or possibly billions. Frankly, in my efforts, I figure in about 20 years, I hope to involve roughly 7 billion people. That should be enough. But no one thinks this is utopian in any regards. There's just ways of connecting people and finding the appropriate use for technology without going on any length about it. Look at what people are doing with cell phones and banking in Africa.
Mm-hmm. And the panel, one of the panels just before this one, talked about cell phones and health care. Same deal. Here's a question from the audience. I read you're working with the administration on innovation initiatives. Can you talk about that?
The innovation initiative stuff is actually taking something obvious, like the idea of a suggestion box. But the deal is that, in any organization, the people who are the rank and file, the line workers, know what's going on and how to fix it, usually better than the people at the top. So if you start getting people in the rank and file talking about things online, working together, coming up with ideas, and then if you get the support of the people at the top, they can fix things in big ways. At Veterans Affairs, 10 big suggestions were approved recently and are being implemented. One which basically says if a vet has gone to a doctor and, the doctor is saying, hey, he has this condition, there is no point in making the vet go to another doctor and having that all done, which costs money and time. One doctor, that should be enough to cut the vet a check. Something simple, but the thing is that you've got to get people talking with each other, and then you've got to have top management support to say, do it. And I have a feeling most of us have been in situations like that.
And what's the mechanism of your work on something like this? How do you make your knowledge available to them, and what's the format in which you're working?
Well, I'm in the awkward position of being people needing me to be a talker about her regarding such matters.
So did the Veterans Administration call you in?
They did. I was part of a contest judging along with a guy from Disabled American Veterans. We just listened to suggestions, rated them, and took it from there. And I'll be going to Washington talking with people in a different department about the same thing. And meanwhile, there'll be more follow-up regarding veterans.
And are you giving them technical advice about how to actually do this online?
Not much, because frankly, there are already a lot of people around, including Sunlight Foundation, and the folks at the, White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, these folks know the technology better than I do. What they need is someone who can talk about it publicly and who can talk about it in bottom-up terms. Mm-hmm. Like, again, when I talk about the Sunlight Foundation being about, things like showing where the money goes, sometimes they just need a guy who can speak in terms that are in language other than Beltway talk.
It's interesting. Instead of being a technical advisor, it's almost like you're a political advisor here, advocating for the sort of Craigslist model of listening to the people you're supposed to be serving.
Maybe something like that, because I'm very interested in governance, not politics. Because the deal is, I don't know, maybe I read too much science fiction, but I see how things could be better. And I read Roman history, too, just like the founders of the country. Lots of lessons there to be learned.
Are you an active libertarian in the party, or are you a libertarian with a small L?
Something even different. And I've been searching for a term for myself, settled mostly on libertarian pragmatist. Because when you do customer service, you see people who are suffering way too frequently for my own good, and you realize that you need some kind of balance wherein you may want minimal government, but still sometimes market solutions fail, and then you got to be your brother's keeper. Not that I'm thinking of anything like healthcare reform. And so the deal is balanced in the way that makes sense. The position I'm taking does seem to be the sweet spot in the computer and internet industry. That seems to be it, and I maybe need to push the terminology more.
Here's a question. How did you decide to make Craigslist so bare bones? It seems to go against all other internet marketing trends. Do you think that bare bones ethic translates into your philanthropic work?
The bare bones stuff is, a different way of saying the design philosophy of keep it really simple, get to the point. It's just like when I'm speaking, I like to have something to say and then say it and stop. Because then, getting out of the way is important. How it extends to philanthropy, I don't know. And my deal is that, sometimes you just want to get to the gist of things and then get out of the way if someone can do it better.
And finally, how much time are you spent? How do you divide your time between your work as a customer service rep, whatever other work you do at Craigslist, and then this kind of work?
My deal is that I do customer service first thing in the morning around 8 a.m. typically. And then get done the priority stuff. I'm doing triage. And then I start, as the urgent stuff and moderately urgent stuff is done, then I may start to multiplex with some of what I think of as my public service stuff. So I just keep balancing them. And even now, I can do a certain amount on my phone, and that'll increase as the technologies get smarter. So that's the deal. And I'll take time off for this, or I'll even travel. Tomorrow I'll be at something giving a talk at the Sundance Resort. Not interested in skiing, and for me it just means 2 hours on a plane where I don't have internet access. And frankly, now one of my criteria for selecting a flight is, will it have Wi-Fi? And I'm serious there.
Are you, I said finally, but one last question
Sure.
from the audience. Are you worried that what you're talking about is going to mean that person-to-person contact will sort of go away?
I see it increasing in practice, particularly as people do these online, offline social networking sites like Foursquare or Gowalla. So people connection a lot face-to-face is increasing, actually, as far as I could tell. More and more of that's happening. Take a look at meetup.com for the quintessence of it. You were going to ask me about that Wired magazine cover?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I missed the cue.
Yeah. The deal there is that the prior month, they had Brad Pitt on the cover. But he didn't really deliver magazine sales like they wanted, so they had to bring in the A-team. Now, the downside is that I did hear that Angelina had been asking about me. And
What's the downside about it?
Well, Well, my girlfriend may have taken issue with that.
Oh, yeah.
And the deal is that apparently this may have played into their. Apparently they broke up for a while.
Right.
But having heard that I'm not available, I think they're back together.
Thank you very much, Craig Newmark. And now, I finish. I have some final remarks here. Now we invite you to meet other organizations with local solutions to global problems. Thank you very much, Craig. I'm so glad that you were here. Our Take Action reception, co-hosted by the World Affairs Council's Young Professionals International Forum, begins now in the Colonial Room, which is located behind you. Get a drink and food and meet representatives from over 15 local innovative organizations joining us today at World Affairs 2010.